Mario, Zelda, Metroid, Sonic. Early 2D games are easy to appreciate because they are in essence a moving painting. It's easier for us to wrap our heads around such a space. There's generally less things happening on the screen, and more importantly, we're very open-minded as to what a pixel sprite game could look like. It's easier for our brains to accept that 2D games aren't real, that what we're seeing is just art. Now when you make the jump to 3D, it's a whole different story. Suddenly there's an entire additional dimension to work with. Every scene in 2D can be curated to look exactly like the developer wants. The camera and backgrounds are fixed into place, but in 3D you can look anywhere you want. Perspective plays a role, and with the freedom players now have, every experience will be different. Visuals no longer have to adhere only to pixel count, but it's also restricted by polygons. On top of this, humans have inherent expectations of how a 3D space should move. But despite all this, the same techniques that were used developing 2D games could also be used here. Because these people did not have access to better technology, they didn't have the luxury of higher fidelity to hide behind. And this forced them to rely completely on their fundamentals and skill. When there is nothing else that determines how good a game looks, no fancy shaders, no crazy game engine, just pure artistic skill, that is when masterpieces are made. Some old games still stand the test of time. Not only do they offer more visual variety than some AAA titans today, but they do so without sacrificing the freedom some games give up for the sake of a more curated visual experience. These games had one focus: fun. And nothing could stand in the way of that singular purpose. There are games today that still remember this, and the exact same fundamentals that made these games great are also used to make these games great. This is why old video games looked so good. When talking about games that have aged well, the words stylized and cartoonish appear a lot, as opposed to games that took a more realistic approach. What this actually means is that games with those labels know what they are doing and put a big focus on color. Games have a few roles to fulfill, but the top of that list is always gameplay, and anything else will be secondary. This is not a movie. You need to be able to clearly interpret what you're interacting with. So color lets you put attention towards what is worth looking at. There's a reason why Mario is bright red and Sonic blue. These are the most important things on your screen, so there should be no way you can miss it. Clarity is of course not the only way to use color. It also lets developers breathe so much life into their levels. Whether the setting is oppressive or liberating, color will always be there to invoke a feeling into the player. And this is how you use it to create a great sense of variety. More variety does not mean a game instantly looks better, but no matter how good something is, too much of it and you will get tired. Even your favorite song gets dull after a while if you play it on repeat too long. That is why variety lets you appreciate when something truly does look amazing. It's important to remember that even today, every time a muddy, visually uninspired game gets attention, it doesn't take long for it to be kicked off the top by a simpler, stylized and more colorful game. But a lot of color isn't enough to make a game look good. In fact, some games remove all traces of color and still look amazing. But how is that? When you want something to look dramatic, a very easy solution is to just increase the contrast of the shadows. Then this can be done entirely in black and white, because we are not working with colors anymore, we are working with something called values. Values play an extremely important role in a lot of things, but mainly contrast and consistency. We as humans expect things and objects to behave in certain ways when hit by light, like cast a shadow or become brighter, so breaking that illusion can be heavily detrimental to a game. For example, if you have a dark room and you put a bright character inside of it, the character will naturally look out of place. You need to make sure it's consistent with the surroundings, otherwise players will get distracted and taken out of the moment. This is where colors cannot help you. If you turn everything black and white and you're all of a sudden confused about what's going on, or you have a hard time even seeing something, you will most definitely still be lost when colors are added on top. A mastery of how values work allows games to look extremely dynamic and versatile, all while staying consistent within its own visuals. But mess this up and you will confuse players and leave them dissatisfied without even knowing why. A good example of this is Pokemon Legends Arceus. Let's take a look at the screenshot. The grass in the background is brighter than the white clouds in the sky. The trees start glowing the further away from the camera they get, while the rest of the background fades away, and the game can't seem to decide what's worth putting shadows on. The values here are all over the place and it doesn't know what it wants you to focus on, and this makes this game visually exhausting to look at. Now turn to something like Breath of the Wild, and there's instantly a huge difference. Even though this game has massively more things on the screen, there's less things for you to get distracted by because the values are consistent. The background is in the background. If the game wants you to pay attention to something, it highlights it intentionally. The way everything is so distinct, it lets you focus on what's most important, what's in front of you, and landmarks in the distance, which brings us to our final point. Here's a quick test. Can you tell me what character this is? Oh, you couldn't tell it was Call of Duty Man 43? But if I show you this, you will know what character it is way before even thinking of its name. It's the same as in like reading. When you read a word, you don't look at each letter individually and then calculate what those mean when put together. Instead, you instantly notice the shape of it and can decide based on the symbolic value it has to you what it means. It's the exact same thing with characters. You don't need to figure out step by step what the traits of the character you are looking at are. You just look at the shape and subconsciously know what it is. This is why silhouette design is so important, since it's the first thing the brain looks at. But how is this applied in games outside of character designs? Well, in 2D games, silhouettes can be used to create a great sense of depth by adding a foreground and a background. But where this really gets taken to the next level is with the addition of 3D. In a 2D game, there's only one way for you to go, so the game doesn't need to guide you visually to the end point. But in a 3D space, you can go anywhere, so you need some way for the player to not get lost and always have a path to the next objective. Now, you can do this with a map and a quest log if you are lame, or you could just place a huge structure on the horizon and let the silhouette guide the player to their destination. Old games understood this perfectly. There's nothing more exciting when you're free to wander anywhere in the game's world, and a silhouette in the distance is inviting you to come over and check it out. I already touched on Breath of the Wild, but if you want another modern example of this strategy used to perfection, we have Elden Ring. Instantly when you exit the tomb, you are bombarded with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 silhouettes already prodding your imagination. No matter where you turn in this game, there's always something on the horizon begging you to explore. And when you finally get there, you're met with multiple new, towering images. Having huge landmarks to work towards is insanely effective because it makes finally reaching that point so much better. Today we are often distracted by technology and how we are constantly told to be amazed by realistic, lifeless graphics. Games are supposed to ignite your imagination and most of all be fun. This is something old games had at their core, but as the years went by, developers started to forget what games are, which is why when a truly exciting game gets released today, it leaves some companies dumbfounded by its success, seemingly having no clue as to why people enjoy it. Nothing will beat a mastery of the fundamentals: silhouettes, values, variety, clarity, and color. These are the foundations video games were created upon, in games that remember that to this day will remain on the top.